From the moment he was born, Barron Trump carried a name heavier than most. As the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, his life was anything but ordinary. While other kids his age played soccer in the park, Barron was attending formal state dinners, standing beside his father at political rallies, and navigating a world where every glance, every step, and every word was scrutinized by the public eye. Growing up in the White House, he was constantly surrounded by security, cameras, and expectations that he would one day follow in his father's footsteps. But deep down, Barron felt suffocated. His schedule was dictated by others, his friendships carefully monitored, and his future seemed pre-written. He never had the freedom to make mistakes, to explore, or to figure out who he truly was beyond the Trump name. Every headline, every social media post about him only reinforced a persona that he felt disconnected from. He wondered, was his identity solely tied to his last name? Could he ever step out of the immense shadow cast by his father? On his 18th birthday, while the world expected him to embrace the privilege of his lineage, Barron made a life-altering decision. Instead of staying in the world of wealth, power, and influence, he chose to leave it all behind. Without bodyguards, without credit cards linked to his family's fortune, and with nothing but a backpack and a small amount of cash, he walked away from the life he had always known. His goal wasn't rebellion, it was self-discovery. In a country built on the ideals of independence and perseverance, Barron was determined to carve out his own path, not as the son of a president, but as a young man searching for his true purpose. When Barron Trump left his life of luxury behind, he was filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. For the first time, there were no security details following his every move, no reporters analyzing his expressions, and no expectations weighing him down. He arrived in St. Clair, a mid-sized American city far removed from the political bubble of Washington, D.C. The plan was simple: live like an ordinary young adult, find a job, and support himself. But Barron quickly learned that independence was much harder than he had imagined. The first challenge was finding a place to live. With the small amount of cash he had brought, he managed to rent a tiny, run-down studio apartment in a modest neighborhood. The walls were peeling, the bed creaked with every movement, and the heating barely worked. Yet, despite these inconveniences, Barron felt something he had never truly known before: freedom. This was the real world, and for the first time, he was experiencing life without the safety net of wealth and power. But the reality of surviving on his own hit hard when he started looking for a job. With no formal work experience and no references, every door seemed to slam shut in his face. He applied to grocery stores, gas stations, and fast food restaurants, but each time, the answer was the same: we're looking for someone with experience. It was a frustrating irony. How could he gain experience if no one was willing to give him a chance? After days of rejection, Barron finally got a break at Carter's Diner, a small, family-owned restaurant known for its home-style cooking. The owner, Mr. Carter, a gruff but fair man in his 60s, initially turned Barron away. But when Barron offered to work the first week for free just to prove himself, Carter raised an eyebrow and reluctantly agreed. "Fine, kid. 1 week. You mess up, you're out." Barron quickly realized that waiting tables was much harder than it looked. On his first day, he spilled coffee on a customer. By the second day, he mixed up multiple orders. His feet ached from standing for hours, and the fast-paced environment left him exhausted. There was no praise, no special treatment, just the expectation to work hard and keep up. But despite his mistakes, Barron didn't quit. He took notes, learned from the experienced waitstaff, and gradually improved. By the end of the week, Mr. Carter called him into the kitchen. "You work harder than most kids your age," Carter admitted. "If you want the job, it's yours." For the first time in his life, Barron earned something purely through his own efforts: no family connections, no political influence, just hard work. Holding his first paycheck in his hands, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. But as he would soon find out, the road ahead would only get tougher. The real world wasn't just about working hard, it was about proving that he truly belonged in it. For weeks, Barron Trump settled into his new life as a waiter at Carter's Diner, and for the first time, he felt a sense of normalcy. His routine was simple: wake up early, rush to work, take orders, clean tables, and clock out late in the evening. The job was exhausting, but there was something deeply rewarding about it. Every dollar he earned was the result of his own effort, not his last name. He had learned how to juggle multiple orders, handle difficult customers, and even picked up a few cooking skills from the kitchen staff. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. One evening, during a particularly busy shift, Barron found himself overwhelmed. The small diner was packed with customers escaping the winter cold, and the kitchen was backed up with orders. The air buzzed with conversations, clinking silverware, and the occasional frustrated complaint. Barron moved as fast as he could, balancing trays and refilling drinks, determined to keep up with the chaos. Then, it happened. A well-dressed customer at the corner booth, someone Barron recognized as a local businessman, called him over, clearly annoyed. "Young man, where's my sauce?" he demanded. Barron's stomach dropped. He suddenly realized he had forgotten to bring the extra sauce the man had requested. "I'm so sorry, sir." "I'll get it right away," Barron said, turning quickly toward the kitchen. But in his rush, he collided with another server carrying a large tray of food. In what felt like slow motion, a steaming bowl of soup tipped over, straight onto the businessman's expensive coat. The diner fell silent. The man shot up from his seat, his face red with anger. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, shaking the stained fabric of his coat. I'm really sorry," Barron stammered. "It was an accident." "An accident? Do you have any idea how much this coat costs?" The man's voice echoed through the diner as other customers watched. Before Barron could say anything else, Mr. Carter, the owner, stepped in. His face was unreadable as he turned to the angry customer. "Sir, I sincerely apologize. Your meal is on the house tonight," he said firmly. The businessman huffed but accepted the offer, still fuming as he sat back down. Then, Carter turned to Barron. "Step into the back," he said quietly. Barron followed, his heart pounding. In the back kitchen, Carter let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. "Kid, I gave you a chance," he said, his voice not angry, but disappointed. "You work hard, I'll give you that. But this isn't just about effort. That man is one of our most important customers. Now he's threatening never to come back." Barron swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Carter cut him off. "But sometimes, a single mistake can cost more than you think." He hesitated before delivering the final blow. "I can't keep you on, Barron." The words hit harder than he expected. Fired. He had never been fired before. No one had ever told him he wasn't good enough. He had spent his whole life in a world where mistakes were covered up, where there was always someone to fix things for him. But now, there was no safety net. Slowly, Barron untied his apron and placed it on the counter. "Thank you for giving me a chance," he said quietly before walking out. That night, as he wandered the cold streets, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, reality sank in. He had believed that as long as he worked hard, things would work out. But now he realized something even harsher: sometimes, hard work wasn't enough. He stopped outside a small bakery and peered through the window. Inside, a mother placed a warm pastry in front of her son, who grinned with joy. A simple moment. A small comfort. Yet, to Barron, it felt like something completely out of reach. Had he made a mistake in leaving his old life behind? Was he really cut out for this world? Then, a voice echoed in his mind, his father's words on his 18th birthday. "If you leave, the world out there won't be kind to you." Donald Trump had been right. But Barron wasn't ready to give up yet. He had come too far. Clenching his fists, he took a deep breath. He needed a new plan. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone push him down. Losing his job at Carter's Diner was a devastating blow to Barron Trump. It wasn't just about the paycheck, though that, too, was a concern, as his rent was due soon. It was the feeling of failure, the realization that no matter how hard he had worked, one mistake had cost him everything. As he wandered the cold streets of St. Clair, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, doubt crept into his mind. Had he been naive to think he could survive in the real world? Had he overestimated himself? Just as these thoughts threatened to consume him, he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, you still alive?" Barron looked up to see Jake, the guy he had met when he first arrived in town. Jake tossed a wrapped sandwich at him. "You look like you could use this." Barron managed a small smile. "Thanks." As they sat on a park bench, Jake cut to the point. "So, what's next?" Barron exhaled. "I don't know. No job, rent's due, and I don't exactly have a backup plan." Jake smirked. "Then you do what everyone else does when they hit rock bottom, you get back up." The words stuck with Barron. That night, as he lay on his mattress in his tiny apartment, he replayed the past few weeks in his head. He had gotten this far, why give up now? A second chance. The next morning, Barron set out again, determined to find another job. But this time, he changed his approach. Instead of just asking for work, he offered to train for free, just like he had done at the diner. Still, rejection followed him everywhere. "We're not hiring. We only take experienced workers." "Sorry, kid, not right now." As the day dragged on, Barron felt exhaustion creeping in. He had knocked on at least 20 doors, and every single one had been a dead end. Just as he was about to head home, something caught his eye, a handwritten sign in the window of a small coffee shop. "Help wanted, barista." Without hesitation, he stepped inside. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, and behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair. Her name tag read Linda. She eyed him suspiciously. "You looking for a job?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Barron said. "But I'll be honest, I've never made coffee before." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Then why should I hire you?" Barron took a deep breath. "Because I learn fast. I work hard. And I don't give up." Linda studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right. You've got 1 week to prove yourself. Learning from the ground up." From day one, Barron realized that being a barista was an art. It wasn't just about pressing buttons on a machine, it required skill, precision, and patience. At first, he was a mess. His lattes were too weak, his cappuccinos too strong, and he once spilled an entire mocha all over the counter. But unlike at the diner, where one mistake had cost him his job, Linda was patient. "Fix it and try again," she would say. And Barron did. He watched the experienced baristas closely, took notes, and practiced steaming milk until his foam was just right. Every night, he stayed late, perfecting his technique. By the end of the week, he had mastered the basics. When Linda tasted his espresso on the final day of his trial period, she nodded in approval. "Not bad, kid. You're hired." For the first time since leaving his old life behind, Barron felt like he was on the right path again. Turning a coffee shop into a community. As Barron settled into his new job, he started noticing something about the people who came to the cafe. Many of them were young, college students, recent graduates, or people just trying to get by. They came in exhausted, stressed, and uncertain about their futures. It reminded Barron of himself. One evening, as he was closing up, he approached Linda with an idea. "What if we turned the cafe into more than just a coffee shop?" he suggested. Linda gave him a skeptical look. "What do you mean?" "A space for young people to connect," Barron explained. Every weekend, we could hold meetups, networking events, job search workshops, even open mic nights. A place where people can learn from each other and share experiences. Linda leaned back against the counter, considering. You really think people would show up? Barron nodded. I do. Because I know what it's like to feel lost. And I know I'm not the only one. Linda thought for a moment, then smiled. All right, kid. Let's give it a shot. A new beginning. The first weekend, only a handful of people showed up. The second weekend, the number doubled. Within a month, the cafe had transformed into more than just a place for coffee. It had become a hub for young people searching for direction, support, and opportunity. Barron had started as a lost kid trying to prove himself. Now, he was building something bigger than himself. He had learned a powerful lesson: failure doesn't define you, how you rise after failure does. What he didn't know was that his success would soon attract attention. And not all of it would be good. For the first time since leaving his old life behind, Barron Trump felt like he belonged. The coffee shop had become more than just a job, it had become a community. Every weekend, young people gathered for networking events, job search workshops, and open discussions about the challenges of adulthood. Barron had found a way to contribute, to help others who, like him, were trying to carve out their own path. But just as things were falling into place, everything came crashing down. A photo that changed everything. One morning, Barron was wiping down tables when Jake burst through the door, his face tense. Without a word, he slammed his phone onto the counter. Have you seen the news today? Barron frowned and picked up the phone. On the screen was a headline that made his stomach drop. Barron Trump spotted working at a small-town cafe, a genuine search for independence or a PR stunt. Below the headline were several photos, one of him behind the counter, another of him wiping down a table, and the worst one of all, a zoomed-in shot of him staring out the window, looking deep in thought. The article speculated whether his entire journey had been an act, a carefully orchestrated move to gain sympathy from the public. Barron scrolled through the comments. Some were supportive. Respect to him for stepping out of his comfort zone. It takes guts to start over. But others were brutal. This is just another rich kid pretending to be one of us for attention. Give it a few weeks, he'll be back in his penthouse soon enough. His chest tightened. Betrayed and exposed. He turned to Jake. Who took these? Jake shook his head. I don't know, man. But someone recognized you. Probably a customer. Barron exhaled sharply. He had done everything possible to stay under the radar, kept a low profile, avoided using his last name, built everything from scratch. And yet, here he was, back in the headlines, reduced once again to just Trump's son. Before he could process it, Linda, the cafe owner, walked out from the back, holding a newspaper. Her expression was unreadable. The phone hasn't stopped ringing all morning, she said. Some are reporters wanting interviews. Others are people accusing me of using you for publicity. Barron's hands curled into fists. Linda, I swear, I had nothing to do with this. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I believe you, kid. But I can't have this place turn into a media circus. Barron stared at her, already knowing what was coming. You're asking me to leave, he said quietly. Linda hesitated, then nodded. I'm sorry, Barron. The words hit harder than expected. Barron removed his apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Thank you for everything, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Then, without another word, he walked out. The media frenzy. The moment Barron stepped outside, he was met with flashing cameras and a swarm of reporters. Barron, is this just a PR stunt? Are you planning to return to politics like your father? Did you orchestrate this for media attention? The questions fired like bullets. Barron gritted his teeth, ignoring them as he pushed through the crowd. Then, suddenly, a black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, and a familiar voice spoke. "Get in." Barron turned. Melania Trump sat inside, her face calm yet serious. No security detail. No flashing lights. Just her. After a moment of hesitation, Barron climbed into the car. The doors shut behind him, sealing them off from the chaos outside. A mother's advice. For a while, they sat in silence. Then Melania spoke. "You look exhausted." Barron let out a dry laugh. "You've seen the news." She nodded. "I know things have gotten out of hand." Barron stared out the window. "I tried, Mom. I really tried. But no one believes me. No one sees what I'm actually doing." Melania studied him for a long moment before asking, "Do you know why people react this way?" Barron turned to her, confused. "Because you're doing something no one expected," she said simply. "And when someone breaks society's expectations, the world tries to pull them back." Barron inhaled deeply, her words sinking in. "You have a choice," she continued. "You can let them define you, or you can prove them wrong." Barron sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. Finally, he met her gaze. "I'm not giving up." For the first time in a long while, Melania smiled. "Then stand up and fight, my son." Taking control of his own story. That night, back in his apartment, Barron powered on his laptop. For weeks, he had let the media control the narrative. Not anymore. He logged into his social media accounts, something he hadn't done in months, and hit record. Looking straight into the camera, he spoke with quiet confidence. "Hello everyone, my name is Barron Trump, and today I want to tell you the truth." This time, the world would hear his story from him, not from the media. And no one was going to twist it. Sitting alone in his small apartment, Barron Trump stared at the blinking red light on his laptop camera. For weeks, the media had controlled the narrative, spinning his journey into a joke, a stunt, or worse, a lie. Every time he stepped outside, he felt the weight of judgment, the whispers of people who thought they knew his story better than he did. But tonight, he had decided, enough was enough. He took a deep breath, met his own gaze in the reflection of the screen, and pressed record. "Hello everyone, my name is Barron Trump," he began, his voice calm but firm. "And today, I want to tell you the truth." Speaking his truth. Barron didn't sugarcoat anything. He spoke openly about why he had left his privileged life behind, not for attention, not for sympathy, but because he needed to find out who he really was beyond the Trump name. He described the struggles of trying to find a job with no experience, of facing rejection after rejection, of working for his first paycheck and realizing what it meant to earn something without privilege. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "I spilled coffee on customers, I got fired, I struggled. And yes, I know that some people will never believe me. They'll always think I'm pretending. But the people who've worked alongside me, who've seen me wake up at 5 a.m. to scrub floors, they know the truth." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I didn't leave my family to prove a point. I left because I wanted to understand the world beyond politics, beyond power. And if that bothers people, if that makes them uncomfortable, then maybe that's a conversation we need to have." He ended the video with one final thought. "You don't have to believe me. But don't let anyone tell you who you are supposed to be. That choice belongs to you." Then, he clicked upload. The internet erupts. At first, Barron didn't check the response. He went to bed, exhausted from the weight of everything. But when he woke up the next morning, his phone was vibrating non-stop. 5 million views. His video had gone viral overnight. The comment section was a war zone, but something was different this time. People weren't just criticizing him. They were listening. I believed the media until I heard him speak for himself. I was wrong about Barron Trump. Never seen anyone in his position stand up like this. Even some journalists who had mocked him before were backpedaling, admitting that perhaps they had judged too quickly. Hashtag I stand with Barron was trending nationwide. And then came the biggest surprise. The invitations. Facing the public, on his own terms. Barron was flooded with requests to appear on talk shows, podcasts, and news interviews. At first, he hesitated. He had spent so long running from the spotlight, was he really ready to step back into it? But then he remembered what his mother had told him. You can let them define you, or you can prove them wrong. So, a week later, he found himself sitting across from one of the most well-known talk show hosts in America. The cameras rolled. The audience was silent. And then came the first question. Barron, do you regret leaving your life of luxury? Barron smiled slightly. Not for a second. The host raised an eyebrow. What do you think you've proven? Barron took a deep breath. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just trying to live the way I believe is right. The interview aired that night, and the reaction was immediate. For the first time, people weren't just talking about Barron Trump as Donald Trump's son. They were talking about him as his own person. Inspiring a generation. But what truly shocked Barron was the impact his story had on young people across America. Letters poured in from teenagers and college students, some from wealthy families, struggling with expectations, others from working-class backgrounds, trying to find their way. A girl from Texas wrote, I always thought kids from powerful families could never understand what real life is like. But after hearing your story, I realized we all feel lost sometimes. Thank you for standing up. A boy from Chicago shared how he almost gave up on his dream. I saw you get torn apart by the media, but you didn't give up. That made me ask myself, if you can stand strong through all that, why can't I? Barron read every message, deeply moved. He had never set out to inspire anyone, but somehow, he had become a symbol for people trying to break free from expectations. And then came the biggest moment of all. The United Nations speech. A month after his interview, Barron received an invitation to speak at a global youth event at the United Nations. He almost couldn't believe it. Standing at the podium, facing an audience of world leaders and young activists, he felt his heart pound. A year ago, I never imagined I would be standing here today, he began. I was born into privilege, raised in the White House. But that didn't mean I understood life. I thought I did, but I was wrong. The room was silent. Some delegates leaned forward, intrigued. When I stepped away from everything, I faced failure, rejection, and doubt. But more importantly, I learned something no classroom had ever taught me. He paused, his voice steady. A person's worth is not defined by their last name. It's defined by how they rise after falling. And most importantly, by how they help others rise with them. Scattered applause filled the hall. Barron continued. Right now, millions of young people feel trapped, by expectations, by society, by circumstances they didn't choose. But I want them to know one thing, you are not alone. And you don't need anyone's permission to build your own path. This time, the applause was thunderous. Delegates stood, clapping. Young activists had tears in their eyes. Barron Trump had done it. Not because of his last name. Not because of his family. But because he had dared to be himself. A new purpose. That night, Barron walked out of the United Nations building, the city skyline glowing behind him. Jake clapped him on the back. Dude, you just made the whole world rethink everything about you. Barron took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. He had faced the biggest storm of his life. And not only had he survived it, he had turned it into an opportunity. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Because the real challenge was what came next. Standing outside the United Nations building, Barron Trump took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. Hours earlier, he had delivered the most important speech of his life, one that was not about politics, privilege, or power, but about self-discovery, resilience, and the ability to break free from expectations. The standing ovation had been surreal, but what mattered most to him was not the applause. It was the faces in the audience, the young people who had listened, who had seen themselves in his words, who now believed that they too could take control of their own lives. As he walked through the bustling streets of New York City, his phone buzzed non-stop. Messages poured in, some from world leaders, others from activists, students, and entrepreneurs. They weren't just congratulating him, they wanted to collaborate, to turn his message into real action. Barron knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stop here. Returning to his roots. A few days later, Barron found himself back at the small coffee shop where his journey had truly begun. The place was just as he remembered: the rich aroma of coffee, the quiet hum of conversation, and the warmth of familiarity. As he stepped inside, Linda, the owner, glanced up from behind the counter and smirked. "The famous boy returns." Barron chuckled, taking a seat. "I never really left." She poured him a cup of coffee and sat across from him. "So, what's next?" That was the question. For so long, Barron had been running from his family's legacy, trying to prove that he could make it on his own. But now, he realized something: it wasn't about escaping his name. It was about using it in a way that mattered. "I spent so much time trying to step out of my father's shadow," he admitted. "But now, I see that it's not about running away. It's about figuring out how to use what I've been given in the right way." Linda nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "And what does that mean?" Barron took a deep breath, a new sense of purpose settling over him. "I want to create something real. A platform where young people can share their stories, find support, and gain opportunities, no matter where they come from." Building the next step. Over the next few months, Barron worked tirelessly to turn his vision into reality. He called his initiative The Next Step, a movement dedicated to empowering young people by providing mentorship, career guidance, and resources to help them carve their own paths. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about politics. It was about giving people the tools they needed to succeed on their own terms. His message resonated. Universities invited him to speak. Community organizations partnered with him. Young entrepreneurs reached out, eager to be part of something bigger. And most importantly, the impact was real. A high school in Ohio launched a Dare to be Different club, inspired by Barron's story, helping students break free from societal pressures. In Los Angeles, a group of young activists created No More Barriers, a campaign aimed at providing job and education opportunities for those born into hardship. Each of them said the same thing: we were inspired by Barron Trump's journey. A new kind of legacy. One evening, Barron sat by his apartment window, looking out at the glittering city below. His phone buzzed. It was his mother, Melania Trump. "I watched your speech," she said, her voice warm. "I know now that you have found your own path." Barron smiled. "Yeah, Mom. I think I finally have." As he hung up, he realized something. For so long, his last name had felt like a burden, a weight he could never escape. But now, it was just a name. Who he was, what he stood for, and the impact he would leave behind, that was entirely up to him. And this was only the beginning. Barron Trump sat on the rooftop of a high-rise building in New York City, looking out at the skyline that had once felt overwhelming but now seemed full of possibility. Just months ago, he had been fighting to prove himself, struggling to find a job, and questioning his place in the world. Now, he was leading a movement that was helping young people all over the country, and it was growing faster than he had ever imagined. The Next Step had started as a small initiative, but its impact was undeniable. Across the United States, young people were forming their own support networks, using the platform to connect, learn new skills, and gain the confidence to chase their dreams. Schools were adopting mentorship programs based on his message, and businesses were reaching out, offering internships and job training for students who might not have had those opportunities otherwise. But Barron wasn't satisfied. Thinking bigger. One evening, Jake, his closest friend and biggest supporter, leaned against the balcony railing beside him. "You realize in just 6 months, you went from being the media's favorite punching bag to one of the most influential young voices in the country." Jake smirked. Barron shook his head with a chuckle. "That doesn't matter. What matters is whether we're actually helping people." Jake studied him for a moment. "So, what's next?" Barron looked out at the city, deep in thought. They had built a platform for young Americans, but what about the rest of the world? "There are millions of young people out there who don't have a voice," Barron said. "Kids who are born into circumstances they never chose, who are told they'll never make it. I want to help them too." Jake raised an eyebrow. "So, you want to take this global?" Barron nodded. "Yeah. I do. Expanding the vision." With that decision, Barron and his team got to work. They began reaching out to organizations in Europe, Asia, and Africa, partnering with local communities to bring the next step beyond the US. The mission was the same: to give young people the tools, mentorship, and opportunities they needed to take control of their futures. A few months later, the first International Next Step Summit was held in London, bringing together young entrepreneurs, activists, and students from all backgrounds. Barron stood on stage, looking out at a crowd that wasn't just American, but global. "This movement isn't about me," he told them. "It's about every single person in this room. You don't have to come from wealth or power to create change. You just need to take the next step." The crowd erupted into applause. A mission without borders. From there, the movement spread rapidly. In India, young women from underprivileged backgrounds started using the Next Step platform to connect with mentors who helped them gain education and career opportunities. In Brazil, a group of teenagers launched their own startup incubator to support low-income youth in starting their own businesses. In South Africa, schools began adopting mentorship programs inspired by Barron's journey. Barron watched as the platform grew into something much bigger than himself. He had spent so much time running from his last name, trying to prove that he wasn't just Donald Trump's son. But now, he wasn't just proving something to himself, he was building something that could change lives. And he wasn't going to stop until every young person, no matter where they were born, knew they had the power to take the next step. Sitting in a quiet corner of the Next Step's headquarters in New York City, Barron Trump scrolled through his emails, reading messages from young people around the world. Each one told a different story: a teenager in India who found her first job through the program, a student in Brazil who started a business after attending one of the mentorship sessions, a young man in Chicago who finally felt like he had control over his own future. For so long, Barron had tried to escape the weight of his last name, believing that he had to run from it to prove his worth. But now, he realized something deeper: his name didn't define him. His choices did. One evening, Jake found him standing on the rooftop, staring out at the city skyline. "So," Jake said, crossing his arms, "you've gone from the media's favorite target to one of the most influential young leaders in the world. What's next?" Barron smirked. "We've built something incredible here, but we're just getting started. The real question is, how do we make this last?" For the first time, Barron wasn't just thinking about proving himself. He was thinking about the future, about building something that would last long after his name faded from the headlines. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Barron Trump made a promise, to himself and to every young person who had ever felt lost. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about them. And he would make sure that the next step lived on long after his journey was complete. At its core, Barron Trump's journey is about breaking free from expectations and defining success on your own terms. It's a story of resilience, self-discovery, and proving that your worth is not determined by your last name, your background, or the privileges, or struggles, you were born into. In America, independence and perseverance are deeply valued, but the pressure to follow a predetermined path can feel overwhelming. Barron's story resonates because it speaks to anyone who has ever felt trapped by societal expectations, whether it's the weight of family legacy, economic hardships, or the fear of failure. He didn't just walk away from privilege, he embraced struggle, failure, and growth to prove that identity is something you build, not something you inherit. His journey teaches a powerful lesson: failure doesn't define you, how you rise after failure does. Success isn't about having doors open for you, it's about learning to push through the ones that are closed. For every young person who feels lost, uncertain, or underestimated, Barron's story is a reminder that the path forward isn't about where you start, it's about the courage to take the next step.